Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio.
Hello and happy Friday. I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
And I'm Holly Fry.
We talked about Aleister Crowley this week.
We sure did.
So I'm glad that for once the name Aleister Crowley crossed my path immediately before October. Since previously I just never managed to write him on the little October section of my podcast shortlist. And then I checked with you to make sure that was not going to be, I was not going to be stealing a topic that you already had your heart set on doing, because I know sometimes each of us do. And then as I was researching it, number one, my knowledge of him was really minimal and mostly based on things people were scared of in the 80s.
Right.
Not like anything that he actually did. And, I have more familiarity with some of the things that he influenced later. Like, I know several people who practice Wicca like that, and that is something that he had an influence on, but I just did not know a bunch about a lot of his other work. And as I was reading about the OTO, I was like, why does this sound so familiar? And then I remembered the podcast, Oh No, Ross and Carrie, in which Ross and Carrie investigate various paranormal stuff. And they did an episode, 2 episodes actually, about the OTO. The first one I think came out in 2013, and I'm not sure how much later the second one came out. And I took the opportunity to re-listen to those while working on this. And if you would like to hear more about what it's like to, participate in the Gnostic Mass that the OTO does, that is a podcast to listen to. I don't remember off the top of my head whether that show has an explicit tag or not. If you have small, I would actually just say it's probably not a children's show. That was how my mom described a lot of these things that she wanted to protect me from. That's not a children's show. I would say the OTO episode of Oh No, Ross and Carrie, not a children's show. Our episode on Aleister Crowley, also probably not a children's show. So yeah, I was like, oh, that explains it. That explains why all of these various rituals sound so familiar to me. I heard Ross and Carrie talk about them.
You have heard them described.
Yeah.
I had mentioned, because he has been on my list, and I honestly, when you were like, are you dead set on doing him? And I was like, oh, thank Greedo, you go do it. Because it's so convoluted and complex. And I have read enough about him that I was like, I'm never going to sort this back out. And I just remember telling you the Battle of Blythe Road is the funniest thing you'll ever read. And you were like, I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, when you and I were talking about it, I was like, oh, this sounds great for October. And then I was like, okay, let's do a little reading. I could feel that the expression on my face was one of absolute bafflement. The whole time I was reading stuff. And I kept being like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to sort this out, but I also can't look away from it. So after spending basically an entire day with my eyes kind of wide looking at the various things that I was reading about the Battle of Blythe Road and all kinds of different rituals that he was doing, and some of his writing is frankly incomprehensible. I was like, I'm just going to have to, the only way out is through.
Yeah.
How this is going to go. So yeah, it's a lot in a tangle. And every time I said in the episode, every time I thought I had found the strangest thing, I would find a different thing. I found out about him faking his own death, or trying to fake his own death, like the morning that I finished this outline. And I was like, here's yet another thing. I'm definitely a spy during World War I, that was weird. Faking his own death was weird. There's all kinds of stuff that he did so much stuff. There's all kinds of stuff that we just didn't really even mention at all.
I had been wondering, because you mentioned his mountaineering expedition that went awry and that he ended up canceling. I have seen some write-ups of that, but haven't followed them down the hole, that kind of just suggests that it was either his fault or that he abandoned a bunch of people. But basically, he does not come out looking good in all of it.
Right.
Was that your understanding?
Yeah. So there was a climber and 4 porters who were killed in an avalanche. I was not able to find like just a really thorough exploration of all that in the time that I had available. I did find one account that said that he was able to hear them calling for help and didn't do anything about it. But one of the things about mountaineering at that level is that it's inherently dangerous. And sometimes when somebody gets into trouble, if you try to go help them, you are also going to be in trouble. And so it was like, I didn't feel like I could sort through that enough to know whether he was just really callous and irresponsible or whether it was the kind of thing where it was like, well, if we try to go get them, we're also going to die. And I don't 100% know the answer with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have thoughts and feelings about Aleister Crowley.
They on Ono, Ross, and Carrie, they have pretty definite feelings about him also.
Is it that rich kids need stuff to do, or this is what their life turns into?
Kind of. Their read on him in a lot of ways is just being like just intentionally obscure and kind of laughing at future generations. Like, I'm just going to write the most ridiculous nonsense and somebody later is going to they're going to spend their lives trying to figure out what I meant by this. Because he used a lot of codes and things when he was writing. And sometimes if you try to read it, you're like, this is not even sentences. I have no idea what this is going to try to be about. I also, frankly, remember being between the ages of 18 and 25 and believing in all kinds of weird stuff that I don't believe in now that I have more experience and maturity under my belt. And so even though I never went nearly to any kind of the extent that Aleister Crowley did in any of his mystical stuff, I can see how a bunch of educated young men with access to purportedly mystical documents would believe that they definitely had for real magical powers that could sick a vampire on somebody.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the whole thing is really like, to me, very much vibes like people who have only ever had validation in their life, presuming that the things that they believe themselves to be able to do must actually be real because they have never known anything else.
Well, and it's also really clear that a whole lot of what he did specifically drew from while simultaneously rejecting his fundamentalist Christian upbringing.
Right.
Like a lot of the symbolism he used was directly from the Book of Revelation. A lot of the things that he was talking about were connected to a lot of the things that are in the Book of Revelation, which, having spent an entire year of Sunday school learning the Book of Revelation, it's a weird book. So like there's so much of it that has this whole context of him rejecting his own religious upbringing, also rejecting a lot of the more conservative mores that existed at the time, all that kind of stuff. So it's a whole big tangle.
I mean, again, I sound very dismissive, and I kind of am, but I find his story utterly just engaging at every level, but I don't hold a lot of stock in any of his claims. That whole thing with his allegedly being a spy and then facing no repercussions.
Yeah.
My read is always like, not because he was a spy, but because money makes problems go away. I don't know if that's the most or the least magnanimous read I can have on it, but
yeah. There is a whole book on that, and the whole book on that was like there's finite time that we have to spend on our episodes because we are doing a new episode of the podcast every week. So reading the entire book that was written about whether he was or was not a spy and exploring all that, like that was really beyond my ability, which is why instead I read some papers by the author of that.
That seems like a valid plan to me.
Yeah. It was a lot.
There's also part of me that lives in such a state of envy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, imagine thinking yourself that important all the time.
Yeah.
That must be an amazing headspace to travel in.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good place to wrap this up. I don't have anything else to add to Aleister Crowley. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where if the 60s counterculture movement had not happened, he would certainly be not nearly as well known today. And at the same time, without his involvement, all kinds of like Wicca might exist, might not really. Because like,
Right. That is the trick, right? Is that he did believe himself to be so important and did produce so much stuff that untangling what is his messed up understanding of a thing versus the actual legitimate roots of something is really difficult.
yeah. Well, and things like Wicca also have multiple different influences, not just Aleister Crowley.
This week we talked about Cagliostro. Finally, he's been on my list for 7-8 years at least.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because one of the reasons that I kept running headlong into this topic and then backing away from it for so long is that it's really hard to determine which tone you want to take when you tell his story.
Uh-huh.
Because if you watch, I mean, even people who are very much scholars and historians talk about it, some of them will approach it much more from kind of the sensational stories of him where he claims to be, potentially popping around time to witness various events or, any of those. So I kept finding myself going, should this be more sensational? Should this be more thrilling? But I think for me, the best way to really look at him was to kind of peel it all back. And like I said, there are details that we couldn't even fit in there because there's a lot. I love that Catherine the Great hated him. I just loved it.
I had a similar experience, I think, when trying to work on Aleister Crowley about what tone do we take with this? And I also liked that Marie Antoinette thought he was a charlatan, not Aleister Crowley, Cagliostro.
Although probably those two. I do love that two women of immense power were like,
yeah,
no.
Not sure about that.
You could skedaddle. I had also discovered, I did not mention in this episode because it would just be a list of longness. In addition to the Dumas work about him, Cagliostro shows up everywhere. He shows up on TV and various things. There's even an anime called Castle of Cagliostro that's a Lupin the Third, if anybody follows that. And he's it's not exactly him, but it's, there have been a lot of characters based on Cagliostro over the years. And so to pluck all those apart just becomes a list making exercise. So I didn't bother to do that. But if you do an internet search, you're going to find plenty. One of the things I was struck by in doing this research was how we have certainly, all of us, talked about, as a society, not just on this show, that lure of a group saying, I will offer you everything you've ever wanted, and how powerful that can be to get people to really buy into your ideology. And in his case, right, he was offering them everything, like eternal life and health, spiritual life and health, and tons of money.
Right.
We're going to get the alchemy machine going and we're just going to churn out golden diamonds for everybody. Like, I can see where desperate people would completely glom onto it. Even as I sit there and go, oh, why did you believe in him? We both mentioned that we wanted to talk about what I'm calling, but don't believe to be, Lorenza's betrayal.
Yeah, I'm like, he coerced her into sex work.
Yeah.
For all that time. And generally was doing a bunch of crime. And I'm like, your wife testified against you. You get what you get.
Yes. Well, and my thing too, that is another thing that is characterized a little bit differently by different people. I did watch one lecture where the lecturer was saying that, at that point, he probably had syphilis that had advanced to the point that it was affecting his behavior, and that he had grown unpredictable, and like she kind of did it to get out of that. And I'm like, she had a lifetime of that. Even if he was in his alleged right mind before that, she had a lifetime of madness to live through. Like, I wouldn't, that's again my take on it, obviously. But yeah, I literally, when I read some early kind of quick biographies that don't go into the fact that he was trafficking her around Europe to gain favor and, job postings and whatnot. And they very much are kind of like, oh, and then his wife turned him in. And I'm like, did you not talk about the sex coercion because you're too dainty, or is it just too uncomfortable and thus you're not considering it in the denouement of the story? Or do you not really know about that? Or do you not think it's horrible?
Yeah. Yeah.
14.
Right. Yes.
I know age meant different things at different points in time, but that is still very, very young.
Yeah. And I would say also still today, like, I can only speak about like the criminal justice in the United States. I don't live anywhere else, but I know that here in the US, the idea that someone having been trafficked and abused, and then eventually enacting some kind of violence on their trafficker and abuser, like, that continues to be something that comes up in court, with people not wanting that evidence to be admitted, even though, like, it's a critical context to all of that.
Right.
So,
right.
I feel like this is sort of a variation on that same theme from centuries ago.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's like he's the blueprint for every power-hungry weasel who just treated people like property.
Right.
And didn't seem to have any conscience about it, which is very... But what's really weird is even in... And again, some of this is because they were written 100 years ago, but even in the texts where they're pretty frank about what was going on, and they do kind of condemn it, there are still like, but he really, really loved her. And I'm like, what?
Even if that's true, boy, do I not care.
Well, and it becomes a bigger, right, theoretical question of like, what does love mean? And, everyone's definition may be different, but mine is, treating someone with respect. And when they don't want to do something, you don't coerce them into doing it.
Right.
That seems like a pretty basic rule to have for someone you love. And she clearly, there were lots of instances where he was like, no, you have to do this. You have to do this. It's the only way we're going to get out of this situation. Or it's the only way we're going to get any money. Or like he put all of the onus on her.
Right.
When she was legitimately, again, remember, raised very, very conservative religious. She was legitimately concerned for her immortal soul. And he was like, no, do it. Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. It's like,
right.
That's just cruel. So that is not love in my book. Anyway, I have feelings about Cagliostro's wife, and I hope someone writes a marvelous play or film about her and her alone from her perspective.
Yeah.
I will buy all the tickets. I'm sorry, that was not the funnest. But I will say this, my favorite phrase that we came across was in that quote describing his seance, and just the phrase lustral waters. I want to make a cocktail named that. I don't know, but I'm doing something and it's going to be sparkly. So
cool.
That's my upbeat ending to this discussion.
Happy Friday. Hope everybody has a good weekend, whatever is on your plate. Feel free to drop us a note. We're at historypodcast@iHeartRadio.com, and we'll see you soon with more episodes. Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.